Drawing children. Now, what I want to talk about today is drawing children from life, not drawing children from photographs. And it's a tremendous amount of difference. First of all, the biggest problem you're going to have is trying to get children to sit still. And we'll talk about that some more later. But first, what I want to start out with is a little bit of the idea of the structure of a child and its proportions. Now, if you're wanting to draw children, obviously you must know something about them. But to take and first thing I want to do is to start thinking about the head itself. The primary thing that we want to take into consideration is that when a child is born, the most prominent thing, of course, is its head. And the size of the cranium in relationship to the rest of the face. Now, if we look at a profile of the head, we find that it's primarily a sort of an oval egg-type shape, and that the face really just takes and sort of hangs from this. And in fact, the jaw part of the baby is really practically non-existent. It's just a very, very small section that takes and comes out like this. We have a slight protrusion of the eye socket. The eye socket tends to follow down in here. We get a little bit of the nose sticking out. And now I'm just basically right now dealing with the bony part. And we get the cheekbone coming through here, the zygomatic arch, and where the ear would be back in here. And essentially the jaw part is very, very, very small. Now, the way this translates into taking and the contour, the sort of the classic look of the child, is that we see basically this. We look at that big shape of the skull and all those cute little things we think about as a child, the way the nose turns up this way, and the fact that the jaw, as we continue to get older, continues to grow and grow. So in the child, what we get is a upper lip coming out, and we get a tremendous stepping back. The lower lip sticks way, way back, and then the chin is just this little bit of a bump underneath here. And we get this kind of a look, which is our basic sort of normal child look. Then, of course, with the eyes being fairly large. Okay, so it's just turned up. Now, as our nose continues to grow as we get older, as the chin does, we find that as we keep getting older, that this contour takes and changes, and we can tell the difference between children age-wise, basically a lot of it by what happens with his nose, the difference between a 2-year-old or 4-year-old and a teenager. So we start to see that this line tends to get a little bit longer, and at the end of the nose, the angle, as you see, we're going to have live models today. The end of the nose tends to get longer, and the angle, now notice here the angle is going up very strongly. As we go across the nose, the angle tends to get longer and get more this way, and as it keeps growing, it tends to keep growing until we get to be an adult and on older age. At the end of the nose, it will actually have a tendency to take and start to drop down. Now, the main thing that you have to think about with a child in terms of drawing is really to concentrate on the proportion. Now, a newborn child, we find that the figure basically is from 3.5 to 4 heads long. Roughly, when we start taking, actually, we're taking, say, let's say a 1-year-old child, you have the proportions of the head to the rest of the figure are basically something like this, where you get 1 head, 2 head, 3, and actually a little bit lower, 4. So the head is really big in comparison. Like as an adult, we find that the sort of ideal proportions is a 8-head high figure. Well, in the child, it's just half of that. Okay, as we start getting older, once we get around a 3-year-old, we start getting into a 5-head high child. Okay, this translates now. We start to thinking about. You find that the baby in the beginning is, you start talking here, is all head and torso and very, very, very small legs, essentially. Okay, as we get older, it keeps getting longer, and that proportional change, we start getting the legs start to keep on growing and growing. Okay, as we get up to a 6-year-old, we actually then are getting into a, or I should say a 5-year-old, we're getting into a 6 heads high figure, which it keeps expanding. And so you can start to see that the proportions are starting to get a much, much more what we consider normal proportions. In fact, that you find that if you look at animated characters, cartoons, you find that they use, generally speaking, a 5-head high proportion for the characters. And part of the reason is that this is a very appealing proportion. It's a proportion that we're familiar to with kids. Everybody likes kids, and these cartoon characters have picked up a lot of those qualities of a child. Okay. In fact, the idea, if you notice in the proportion that we're talking about here, that the eye really comes down in the lower 1/3 of that head. Well, again, if you look at what we consider cute is that kind of proportions where you have a large part of the head on top in comparison to the part on the bottom relationship of the eye. Now, the thing that you have to do in dealing with children is drawing them is that, first of all, you pretty much, we're talking a little bit about basic structure here, but you pretty much have to sort of not think in terms of anatomical, or just basically shouldn't think in terms of anatomy. What we have to do think in terms of simplified forms and structures. In fact, I have suggested to people that if they really wanted to learn how to draw well, that they could take and start out drawing a child, and of course after 20 years they'd be worked up to themselves an adult and be doing pretty good. But the idea of the simplified forms, I mean, that's the idea of picking up a child, you know, and pick it up every day, you'd be able to, by the time you're 20 years old, you're picking up a ton, okay. But there's a lot to it, the same kind of progress in developing this simplified form. Now, what I want to do here is draw a little bit from Raphael. Now, Raphael, of course, is a classicist, and the ideal of the classicism was to use a very, very simplified, clear type of form. And he built things up with basically what we refer to as synthetic forms or non-real forms, geometric shapes almost. But you find that it's very, very close to what we see in the child. Okay. Now, according to the proportions that we just talked about, this is about a 5-year-old child that he's taking and drawing. The first and foremost thing that you try to deal with, and I'll talk some more about this as we go along, is that you want to take and which is the hard part, but which is the thing that gives the children their charm, is the getting the gesture, the movement of that child. So that the first thing you try to do is you try to feel, and this is what Raphael has done in his drawing. He's taking and trying to feel what this basic sort of movement or action was. Okay, now if we can take and look here, what he's done is then dealing with this head, he's taken a very, very simple form, basically dealing with the sphere. And taking him, getting the axe, thinking where the eyes are, and coming in and putting in a very simplified shape. Notice how at this stage already the drawing looks, this is a child's head. There's no question about it. We can start seeing, for instance, where the line of the eyes, and basically the proportions, what we talked about, it's already in that 1/3 proportion. Okay, the neck really is just a simple cylinder. The torso becomes this, again, this simple volume. Trying to see. So right now, really, the basic thing I'm talking about here is that where the drawing is really more like a drawing of a mannequin than what we're used to thinking about as an anatomical type of structure. Okay, the pelvic area, again, is just another cylindrical type form. And concern becomes how one thing fits into another. Okay, the legs are these type of round forms. The knees, the same. And as we start working down here. Now he's basically exaggerated the scale of the feet, making them awfully small. But the basic proportions here are pretty much, okay, the leg coming out, thinking in these very, very simplified types of forms. Okay, the arms, taking and coming round. Okay, now what I want to take and next point out is a few little things that are sort of a little different with a child that are from, say, an adult. Now, primary thing that we have to start with is to take and there's extra folds. There's extra, they almost look like joints. Now, what I want to do is if we can corner Nicholas here. Come here, Nicholas. Come here. Come up here. Oops. Okay. Okay. Now, if you sit right here for a second. Now, if you'll notice, you notice that his arms, now this is in a smaller child, well, it's not too strong. You'll find that we start picking up extra folds. And when a child is, we say a year old, you start to find really strong folds. They'll start to come through here. We start to come through here. And it's very, very rounded. Everything tends to be very, very smooth. So, and you'll notice on the legs, it's the same thing. So that what we do is we start to pick up little things that start to happen in here. We start to see these little extra folds. You actually, in the legs, sometimes you start to feel these look like little round balls of fat. But they're very convenient for taking and drawing. They really take and show us how the form is a round form. Now, what Raphael has done, of course, he's taken and been dealing with this stuff, but he's also taking and the part, for instance, you notice that the childs tend to have this sort of a stomach. Now, again, Nicholas, you want to stand up for a second? Stand up. Stand up on top up here. Well, okay, we can see. Okay. I think we got that. Let's try again. Stand up, Nicholas. Here. Well, Annalisa, you can stand up there too. You're showing too. Okay, we can see. You can see this very sort of a round form. You can start to see where we're feeling these basic, simple volumes. Okay, it's a very round form. So what we have to do when we're drawing, we have to take and try to analyze the figure from these basic, simple masses. Now, in this drawing that I'm drawing from here, he's taken and done some preliminary drawings or some more analytical studies of the figure. And in doing this, he's taken and broke it down Because what becomes important is the way forms take and connect to each other. Like this is a section of the leg that's coming down, and we have a foot that takes and comes out this way, okay? Now, in drawing this, what he's done is he's takes and shows these basic folds, but he does it in a very diagrammatical way. He comes in like we're saying, okay, we have this round form here, we have this coming down, fitting in. We feel as we're coming down, and he draws these curves, and it's just, it's very real to the lines and the shapes that we see on a child, and at the same time, it's also very, very diagrammatical in terms of just abstract thinking of volumes and the classical formula. So you can see all this stuff breaks down into these simple sort of round types of forms. The primary consideration becomes how one form fits into another and how we make the transition from one form to another. Okay, same thing when you start dealing with any of the extremities. Okay. Now, I think maybe the best thing here is I start doing a series of drawings of the kids. And maybe we can, Annalisa, you want to take and pose for me for a little bit? Okay, let's have you stand up there. Well, stand up on the stand. The first prime requisite in drawing children is patience. Lots and lots of patience. Now, and what you'll do, okay, now, Annalisa is probably an exception to a lot of kids because she's, being my daughter, being an artist daughter, she's been around people who pose and what have you, and so she holds still. Most children don't. Okay, now, okay, Annalisa, first let's just stand and face over that way. You face over so Daddy can see you from the side. Okay, okay. Now, what I want to first point out that sort of a characteristic of a child is the gesture, this pose that we were talking about, is when you try to see and okay, notice, try to feel the sort of the sense of balance that is going on. For instance, we look at the head, we feel the way the neck is taking and pulling out of this, the way we feel the torso taking and coming through. Let's take and draw this a little bit smaller so we get it all on the page here. Okay. Think, okay, the head, try to feel that neck coming out. We feel the curvature. And it's a very natural stance. You find that this sort of the famous S curve that we talk about. Okay, so that the rib cage and the whole torso, we take and treat it, try to treat it and see it essentially as a very, very simplified form to begin with. And in fact, we use a sort of a cliche a lot of times of talking about the sort of basic beanism of where we see a very, very simple type bean shape. And then the legs basically are very simple, sort of straight type forms coming down. Okay, but to try to get that characteristic. Okay, Nicholas, you stand still there for a second, okay? No, stand up. Stand up. Stand up. Nicholas, you stand up. Okay. Well, let's see if we can take and get Nicholas going here, because I want to take and draw a little comparison here. Annalisa is just about 5, and Nicholas has just turned 2. So if you'll notice the exaggeration here of this type of shape, and what we try to do is to feel that even at a smaller, that stomach becomes more of a, without becoming malnutritioned or something like that, but you try to feel that sort of basic type of shape. Okay, you start to see how this is coming down, and that head. Okay, let's get Nicholas. Let's get them to sit down, then maybe we can get a. Okay, there we go. Well, I'm going to take and have to do this a little. Jump into the meat of this thing a little faster. Okay, okay, let's get into the very practical part of this, and I'll start doing these drawing. That what I do in my own drawings when I'm taking and working with children like this, I take and first I try to grab the gesture, whatever the action is, very, very quickly, and I will find that I take and will do. Okay, what I'm doing here now is I'm essentially remembering an action that was going on a second ago. Very quickly, trying to feel what's going on. And as you keep looking, sometimes they will come back, sometimes they won't come back to that pose. What I'll do is I'll take and do several drawings, or have several drawings going at the same time, where you're trying to grab hold of this action. You see? Okay. Now, what I've noticed that what I'm doing here is that I'm incorporating this basic bean type shape very, very, very clearly. This becomes sort of the essential thing that I'm dealing with. And that's sort of a neat pose, or I can't. This is, of course, it was all rehearsed very carefully, the whole process here. Okay. Let me. Very simple. Okay. Okay, now I've got a lot of gestures here on the page. Now let's see if I can start taking and carrying these things through. Actually, this is the important part, the thinking that when you're drawing, and this is a basic tenet of my approach to drawing, is that I don't really rely on copying the model. It's not really essential that I have the model sitting still, and in the case like this, it's impossible. That what I do is I use the model as a reference. Now, the primary reference here is, the general shapes and what have you, and taking and feeling what that action is and understanding what those forms look like. So now, from here, what I would do is start to take and the model is moving around, obviously, and I'm looking there, and I can take and start to now develop these drawings using these basic ideas. So I'll take and starting here, and I'll take and bring all of these up to some degree of clarity. So I think about that basic structure of what this head looked like, what the volume is. Kids, please don't push on that. Okay. Okay, the proportions that we talked about. The shape of the hair, the way it's coming down. And you use these things to help show what an action is. Now, for instance, the way the figure is taking and leaning back. I use that hair taking and coming out. I take and think of the hair coming over and around those shoulders. Okay. The arms, okay, I'm primary concern to begin with here is to think of, okay, of course, where they are, but how they connect one into the other. So that I start across, okay, you're holding hands up here. First thing I want to do is just to think about where they are. Okay, so coming through is very simplified forms. Now, her arms are proportionately a lot thinner than his are. So you try to feel, I'm getting my length, think of my width, and it's essentially a cylindrical type of form. Okay, how this fits into here. And what I've done here, for instance, just this little bit of connecting, but first I build on a very, very simple straight line. Okay. Hands. Okay. Now I can use her tights there as a means of helping to take and describe the volume. So as I start to work over and around, now you can see how quickly, now I've even opened the space up here a little bit, that very quickly it takes and shows the roundness of that and how it starts to fit in. Now I want to take and pull that gesture down, and I think about that rib cage in there, but I'm more concerned with taking and understanding the volume. So as I'm pulling through, I can take, say, oh, there's a kind of gesture that's going on here, and then we feel that stomach taking and pulling through in here, and I'm building on that basic shape that I had underneath. Okay. Notice the proportions now of how we have essentially a 3-head high torso, okay, and that fits right along with her age. She'll be 5 years old next month. So that what we have then is a 5 heads or a 6-head high figure. Okay, now the legs fitting, and we use, again, the tights become a very convenient thing to help show how these forms out. I want to take and first think of this, though, as a simple cylindrical type of form, going back in, and where the other leg would, say, be back in there. And I improvise a lot like this. I take in, now this leg we could take and say, well, maybe they were crossed, I can't actually even remember now. Or this leg could have been going back in the other direction. And what I'll do is I'll find that I'll take and use various and sundry poses, one working with the other. Okay. So I can think, okay, this shape, going back through here, this going back down through here. Now let's take and see if we can get Nicholas in here a little bit. Just use a little symbolism there for how they're holding hands. Now, him, in my original sketch here, the head proportion is a little too small. I have to take and make that head a little bit larger. Again, using very, very simplified forms. Thinking of where those eyes are. And you notice that talking a little bit about that, going back to that contour here, that that shape of that contour, you notice what I did with Annalisa here, was to take and draw this so we really feel that that curve is going back in. So that the forehead is more like this and going back, and the eyes sort of fit back in this fashion, and then the nose takes and pulls out like this. Okay, this is what you find is taking place. You look and you try to see this coming through. You feel the line, and the cheeks are these rounded types of forms that take and pull out. And again, remember that the mouth sits back, so we really feel this broad cheek, round cheek feeling. So we take and you look at the total shape of this thing. It's very important that when you're approaching drawing children, so that you don't get wrapped up or get preoccupied with any one part, because it's a total disaster unless you're taking a drawing from a photograph or something like that. So you try to see these basic sort of characteristics and use the model to take in and help you to see these, what are the sort of the idiosyncrasies, or it takes, even though these are my children, you find that children at this age aren't dramatically that different. That if you start out with these sort of basic kinds of shapes, and for the individuality of that child that you're drawing, just take and modifying it this way or that way a little bit, you'll get actually very, very close to what's going on. Okay, now the main characteristic I want to make here with him is the fact that for his size, now his stomach is really taking and coming out. Notice I'm drawing transparently. I'm drawing through here as if he was made out of glass. So I try to think about, okay, how is this fitting in? Try to see the very, very simplified forms. Okay. Feel that navel really coming out. And we use the way this, the stomach fits into that pelvic area becomes, again, one of those important things. You notice that, say, starting out here, we're thinking of this basic shape, that basic bean shape that I was discussing about, that stomach fits in. We have the pelvis is coming across in here, and so the shape of the stomach is this volume that is really fitting onto this. It's not so far removed from what we get at the the 55-year-old with too many cases of beer behind him. That's the same sort of look, but you get this. Okay, so you try to feel this pulling around, and notice again those sort of the neat characteristics is that the way the pants fit, the way they come down and up, and you use these as a means of taking and showing the volume as it's wrapping around. Okay. Feel around the legs. Okay. Now, what I'm going to take and approach the legs at is I want to take and get the feeling that maybe he's sort of giving a little bit of pressure. He's leaning back. Maybe the legs are coming here a little bit forward, so we can feel there's a little bit of tension that's taking and going on. Okay. So first thing in this case, then I would be taking in, making sure right away that the placement, making sure where these feet actually are sitting on the ground, so that I take and try to feel the direction. And even in dealing with that feet, we go back to look at the Raphael. We try to see how the forms, one fits into the other, keeping it very, very simple. The arm. Back in, arm coming out. Okay. Now let's take and do some more here. I'll just take and keep developing this basic idea of how they can deal with these round, simplified forms. Now, first here, again, we got that gesture. Now, he's sitting on her legs here, so that we have to be conscious of the volume. We're straddling a rounded mass in here, and he's got to get his legs going over that. So we have to think about how we draw these, the angle of the spheres and the forms that fit on to one to another. So we try to see that these are taking in, going back over, out, again, that belly. And the critical part, of course, is that getting that gesture, really feeling that subtleness of the body. Because a child, actually up until we get into puberty, all of the joints and everything are really not that well connected, especially in a young child like this. And that's part of the thing that gives them that mobile, rounded quality, is the fact that actually the knuckle is not even attached to the bone. So they can fall, they do a lot of things that would break and shatter our bones, but the child takes in and has this sort of flexibility to it. So we take and we try to communicate that by feeling the way the forms take and one flows into the other. Okay, again, using for instance, the pants here again is a means of helping to see the roundness. Okay. Okay, feeling them come down. You find that I guess I've already said this before, that the most difficult thing that you have in dealing with the children is trying to keep this sort of flexibility in how you take and approach it. I find that most people when starting out drawing children have this tremendous frustration because what they're trying to do is to take and do a very, very detailed drawing of something. And what happens is that all of the non-child characteristics take and come forward. They start looking at all kinds of wrinkles and the old cliches of taking and drawing little old men or little old women, because it's that kind of preoccupation. The thing that makes a child such a marvelous thing to start with is this exuberance, this sort of playfulness, and that is translated into a drawing by the feeling of that gesture, of taking and feeling sort of a flow in the drawings. If you look at the drawings of probably the most famous American artist of drawing children is Mary Cassatt. They have that very graceful, that really natural setting of the way the lines take and flow one into the other. Okay. Well, maybe we're going to get some quietness here. Yeah. Okay, let's get Nicholas here flying through the air. Okay. Notice that characteristic of trying to get that gesture is to take and continue to work with the continuity of how this thing carries through. Simple volumes. I thought we had a still one there for a second. Now, actually, from the drawings I'm doing here now, I could actually take and do a painting like some of the things that you saw in the beginning here, some of the ones that are over here. Nicholas, Annalisa, do you want to pose for me for a little bit now? Why don't you stand up there and we'll take and try to see if I can do a drawing that's got a little more complete that we can take and see. Okay, now let's take and put our hands down. And maybe Nicholas will go over with his mother over there where he's not going to be taking and creating quite a mess here. Nicholas, come here. Come here. Okay. Now, okay, and let's just sort of stand up there and put one hand on your hip there. Just sort of something like that, okay? Great. Okay, why don't you sort of look over there, okay? But just keep the rest of your body sort of facing me over here. Okay. Now I'm going to take and, I think what I'll do is if you can keep your head still, I'm going to take and do a drawing of your head, okay? Okay, let's. Okay, again, very, very simplified form. Taking in, seeing, trying to see the basic sort of masses that are taking place here. Placement, the nose, where the eyes are going. Oh, keep your head looking over that way, please. Okay. Now, what I concern myself mostly here is thinking about what forms are overlapping what. Like, for instance, comes to a critical point right here. For instance, I want to take and see how we feel this going behind and how we feel the nose taking and coming forward. Okay? Then I try to take and feel the cheek coming from behind, back in here. And then from there, I try to feel the mouth taking and coming out in front of that. So I'm taking and dealing with these very, very clear forms. Okay, got a little problem here. Okay, there we go. Okay, now, Lisa, let's take and see if we can carry on here. Let's keep our head looking over this way. Okay? Now, this already has the strong basic characteristics and shapes that we want. Now, she's being a good trooper today. Very simple volumes. Feel where the ear's at. Okay. Now, this a word about dealing with the eyes. Now, the eyes, as we talk about them, are basically just round balls. And so what we try to do is to take and feel the way an eyelid takes and goes over that ball. So we can take and try to see these forms going this way. Okay. Pulling across and going around in here. Okay. Now, so that when I'm drawing this, then I'm taking in, I always think about these basic round masses. So I try to feel this ball in here, and then I take and I work over those surfaces. Try to see that eye lid going over and coming down and attaching the eye socket. Coming around through here. Okay. Then feeling where the eye socket starts to pull in. Now, the problem that most people have is that they try to put too much into the drawing. Actually, you can put in everything that's there. What you have to do is you have to take and control the values of how you take and put things in. You have to try to feel, like for instance, okay, the idea that I talked about now is the working with the ball, working with the sphere. So this spherical form, when it comes down to now starting to take and render or to take and put the tone on the figure, I take and work with this basic idea. If you take a say you had a bowling ball, an egg, what have you, basically the idea is that we take and push the tone to the outside edge. We take and we want to make something look round. What we do is we make this tone take and go to the outside. Okay. Now I've discussed this more thoroughly in other lessons, but essentially now this is the idea. And the darkness of that tone is determined more by the degree that something is turning away from you rather than how close or how far it is. So now when I want to start taking and putting tone in here, I take and have to control my values. Now I want to take and make this round. She's got a nice round cheek. Okay, so I want to make this come out and I want to make this turn going away. So I start to take and work with this tone, but it's got to be kept and controlled value-wise. It doesn't take very much to take and start making this cheek start to come around. But you can look at for somebody like this who was really a master at taking and dealing, drawing and painting children is a guy like Renoir. And he carried this kind of thinking to really an extreme where you take and really feel these very, very rounded forms. So that I now want to come in and start to push the tones, start to feel, let's see, even the nostrils. I just slowly start to take and build these forms up. We can take the tone on the underside, the nose, feel the lip, okay, the underside of the lower lip, the upper lip, and basically we could just take and work all around. And get the other eye. Okay, Annalisa, would you look over here look over this way a little bit more? Okay, thank you. We try to see. A little comment about taking and dealing with the hair here is that what you try to do is you try to avoid drawing every hair. I mean, that's not what we do is we try to take and suggest really what is going on. And you can do a good job of this just by taking and giving a little bit of detail and letting the viewer then believe that there is actually more there. So we take and come in. Maybe I'll hit a few strands to start showing what's going on. Try to show the shape of the head underneath. And then I would take and do the same thing I was doing with modeling the form, is take and model the form of the head or the hair in the same way. As it starts to go back, I would start to take and drop this in tone. Start to feel, look for the shape. Coming down and see the line of that hair. Feel pulling down. Strands coming from behind. Again, notice I'm not trying to draw every strand. I just take and try to feel the flow of that hair. Okay. Now, the way that we draw this part of the neck and the head fitting into the neck is that you, first of all, you think of this neck as a cylinder fitting into that head. And it's actually, when you look at the skull, just notice, look really how small the neck is. And what we see here is that, see how the way the skull takes and comes out back behind. Okay? Now, what we have is that you take and try to see this sort of the way the head is balanced on that neck. We sort of feel this type of a shape. And then it's lower in the front than it is in the back. But there's a lot that goes on back here. Usually you can see it much more clearly on a sort of a close-shorn little boy, or even a smaller baby. The hair hasn't grown that much. But you can see the sort of way this pulls back. So, and the underside is that you try to see the fitness. Now we can take and we look at it on Lisa there. We can see the chin, and you can actually feel this sort of little double chin. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit there, but children basically have these things. That we refer to as the baby fat. You feel that roundness. A marvelous drawing, pretty much the same angle actually almost, is the drawings of say Peter Paul Rubens that he did of his son. Okay. Now you can see, actually being that sharp and that clear does not take and detract from that feeling of the child. If the proportions are correct and you don't get in there and start drawing wrinkles, you can still deal with all these large, simple, basic masses. So now we can feel the neck coming in. And I'm making her feel a little bit heavier than she actually is. Okay, then we start to feel, okay, that basic shape. Well, we're going to try this one again, huh? Okay. Now, okay, going back to the idea of this. Okay, Annalisa, you can sit down. We'll take, or maybe you better stand up there, and it'll keep Nicholas standing up there. Okay. The way we take and start adding the arms, legs onto this basic torso. Now, I talked about this basic bean shape. This shape here that we take and begin with in trying to get a very, very simplified understanding of the movement. Now, what we do is we feel that the shoulders are taking and coming off of this rib cage area. So we try to feel these basic masses, and you'll notice like for instance where the navel is, okay, here, you feel the muscles here that come off of the pectoralis muscles. You can feel this thing here, but as that arm comes down, you get this it's almost an exaggeration of this folding where we feel one form coming in, another form, and we get this type of tucking together. And these become very, very clear. But that little bit really takes and starts to show that form. Okay. Another consideration in taking and dealing, now we're starting off with this simple form here, is that first I said, okay, we take in, this really does signify the basic rib cage and pelvic area. Now the pelvis actually up here. But what's important here now, in the very simple forms, we show how the forms overlap. Now, for instance, we feel the rib cage in here, you would feel the rib cage here. And then taking and just very simply being careful about what line overlaps in front of what. We would feel that stomach, okay, coming around. We feel that little bit of a flank pad there. And then the pelvis coming out from behind that. And if we had a nude here, we would see this basic, and drawing over that surface, you would see this coming down, and this little bit of fat and what have you coming down to the pubic arch. Now you really start to feel this fat area in here. Well, that's actually what I want to talk more. We haven't talked about the back really hardly at all here. Is that in dealing with the back, which it becomes a thing, the main characteristics that we see, because it's a very, first of all, we have a very, very simple. First, try to feel the base of the skull in the back where we feel the child's head is attaching to the neck. Okay, then we come back and we think of that basic bean shape. And I can't really make make this too important about seeing the basic shape now. Okay, the characteristics that we deal with from the back are the scapulas primarily. And if you will just take and feel, okay, first we get this, then you feel those small little scapulas that taken that little bit of sharpness that comes out of those really soft areas. Then we try to see, it doesn't take very much. And you'll find not much more than those two little spots take and start to give us the idea. Then we have to be very careful about making sure, again here, repeating a lot of this stuff again and again, that we see that as a cylinder, the segment of a cylinder. We feel this now fitting into that. And we feel the scapula pulling from there. And that arm is thought of as a simple cylinder taking and going up. Okay. Same thing here. Let's just say that this arm was coming back. We would feel a slight tension of where the scapula would take and start to push back. But still, we would be dealing with those basic, simple, little forms. Okay. Feel coming on. Okay. Feeling the center back. Now, thinking of that rib cage, now we would feel from here, we would see the stomach taking and pulling out. In the back, if we had a nude, you would see the dimples of where the spine comes down and attaches to the pelvis, and which become basic sort of, again, landmarks coming down, and where this shape then would take and be fitting in. The buttocks, of course, are really nothing more than sections of round ball. Legs going back in, a cylinder. And it pays to really take and develop your whole sense of drawing out of your head.